roar of the arena. The initial impact was auditory, a thundering wave that rattled the ribcage and made the very floorboards tremble. Then came the blinding lights, a dizzying swirl of color and motion reflected in the upturned faces of a ravenous crowd. The Apex Arena was a cauldron of fervent energy, every seat crammed with devotees whose collective roar resonated like a single, monstrous voice from the nosebleed section to the pricey ringside, where the city's elite feigned nonchalance while sipping bubbly. Not an inch of space remained. Within the cage, two warriors engaged in a savage ballet, a mere undercard match, perhaps, but no less brutal. Each blow sent a spray of perspiration into the air, briefly transformed into shimmering, ephemeral jewels. The smaller combatant, a lean young man sporting a serpent tattoo coiling around his bicep, moved with a restless agility, his jabs lashing out like striking snakes. His adversary, a massive, granite-like figure with a rough beard, seemed impervious too. The blows, his gaze predatory and fixed. Remarkable footwork from Viper Vasquez, a voice, smooth yet edged with steel, sliced through the din. Maria, the Matador Rodriguez, the MMA Network's seasoned commentator. Her image flashed on the jumbo screen surrounding the octagon, an oasis of calm amidst the storm. He's controlling the tempo with his speed, keeping the Hammer at bay. But can he sustain that pace for 3 rounds? That's the crucial question. The Hammer provided a definitive answer with a right hook of colossal force that landed squarely on Vasquez's chin. The kid crumpled, hitting the mat with a sickening crunch. A tidal surge of sound washed over the arena, threatening to drown out all else. And there you have it, Maria declared, her voice pitched higher in excitement, but still controlled. The sheer power of the Hammer, one connection, and good night, Vasquez, an undeniable knockout. The referee intervened, halting the fight, as medics hurried into the octagon. The Hammer, chest heaving, raised his arms in triumph, basking in the audience's fervent approval. Yet beneath the surface of victory, a shadow lingered in his eyes, a weariness belying the exultant cheers that Maria's face reappeared on the screens. A stark reminder of the stakes in this brutal arena, that a single error, and it's over. Tonight, the Hammer demonstrated why he is revered as one of the division's most devastating strikers. But we can only hope Vasquez will be all right. That was a solid hit, and the consequences can be unpredictable. The medical team continued to attend to Vasquez, gingerly securing him onto a stretcher. The arena lights dimmed, and the announcer's voice reverberated, introducing the next pair of fighters. A shift occurred in the Apex Arena's atmosphere, a concentration and intensity that deepened. The preliminary bouts were mere warm-ups. The main event was imminent. In the commentary booth, Maria, the glow of the monitor illuminating her features, subtly adjusted her headset. Already, her mind was engaged with the notes for the upcoming contest, pitting a battle-hardened veteran against an ambitious newcomer. She understood these athletes, their strengths, vulnerabilities, and histories. She knew the narratives they hoped to inscribe within the confines of the octagon. Yet an unusual current thrummed beneath the surface tonight, a palpable anticipation denser than the typical fight night fever. It wasn't just excitement. It was a sense that something unforeseen was brewing, that tonight's headliner would transcend a regular match. It promised a spectacle. She stole a glance at the monitor showing the backstage area. A solitary figure stood shrouded in shadow, his face obscured by the muted lighting. Jason Statham. The actor. The fighter? Maria had heard the whispers, viewed the clips, the rumors that had taken root online, that she dismissed them as publicity stunts. The actions of a fading action star hoping to rekindle interest. Now, confronted with the reality of him, his expression unreadable doubt began to creep in. There was an unnerving stillness about him, a contained intensity that mocked his years. He appeared formidable. Maria cleared her throat, adjusting the microphone's position. Tonight was shaping up to be intriguing, exceptionally intriguing. Enter Rico. The bell's clang shattered the preceding hush, an abrupt end to the quiet. Rico Ramirez erupted, a kinetic explosion lacking finesse, fueled by a savage, untamed aggression that propelled his opponent backward. Razor. Rico lived up to his moniker, a whirlwind of swift motion, his fists and feet a tempest, leaving no space for breath or strategy. He didn't circle. He pounced. The mauler Olsen, a mountain of a man, weathered the initial onslaught, his arms a desperate shield. But Rico offered no respite. A sharp jab jolted Olsen's head. A punishing kick weakened his leg. Smelling weakness, sensing panic, Rico capitalized. The deceptive high feint preceded a brutal liver punch that reverberated through the arena. Olsen wheezed, his features twisting in agony as he collapsed. The referee intervened, arms waving frantically. The audience's roar crashed over Rico like a breaking wave of admiration that he thrust a fist skyward, a wild grin plastered on his face. This was it, the validation he craved, the crowd's adulation. He bounded onto the cage, flexing, reveling in the glare of the spotlight. The announcer seized the microphone. Still undefeated, Racer Rico Ramirez. Rico snatched the microphone, shoving the man aside. "Did you all see that?" he roared, his voice buzzing with adrenaline. "Did you witness me dismantle that chump?" Olsen, more like oblivion, because that's where his career is going. The crowd erupted again, a blend of cheers and jeers that he eagerly absorbed. "I'm the apex predator in this whole damn league," he declared, arrogance coating his voice. "The best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be." He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd, a carefully manufactured threat tightening his eyes. "And I'm starving, that I'm hungry for a genuine test. I want a real brawl." He aimed a finger like a drawn sword toward the VIP section. "I hear we have a certain has-been action star in attendance tonight. Statham." "Yeah, you, cue ball. Word is you know a thing or two about throwing punches. Why not step into the octagon with a genuine fighter and experience reality?" A stunned silence descended. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Had he really just called out Jason Statham? Rico puffed out his chest, relishing the palpable surprise. He held the microphone closer, his voice a low growl. "What's wrong, Statham? Intimidated? Perhaps you should stick to make-believe and leave the real combat to us pros." He finished the insult with a derisive snort. He tossed the microphone back, hopped down from the cage, and sauntered toward his corner, his entourage enveloping him. He slapped hands with his trainer, gave a curt nod to his manager. But his eyes remained glued to the VIP section. He needed to gauge Statham's reaction up close, free from the intoxicating gaze of the crowd. The cracks in Rico's armor began to appear. The manic grin faltered. The bravado felt manufactured that a lone bead of sweat snaked down his temple as he glanced back at the VIP section, his eyes searching, almost pleading. But he needed Statham to respond. He needed the spotlight. He craved the conflict, even as it terrified him. His eyes, usually gleaming with manufactured confidence, now betrayed a hint of something else. Feared, he dreaded fading into obscurity. He dreaded being unmasked as a charlatan. That he dreaded the possibility that he wasn't really Razor Rico, the unstoppable force, but a desperate kid from the wrong side of the tracks, striving to prove his worth. His face, starkly illuminated by the lights, revealed the truth he so desperately guarded. He wasn't just hungry for victory. He was hungry for belonging. He yearned for someone to truly acknowledge him. And maybe, just maybe, he wanted someone to finally silence him. Unseen observer. The arena's thunder slammed into him as he crossed the threshold, a guttural rumble that resonated deep within his sternum. He'd chosen a ringside seat, close enough to taste the sweat, yet tucked into a dim recess away from the camera flashes and pushing bodies. Tonight was about absorption, not exhibition. He smoothed a hand over his closely shorn hair, tugging the brim of a nondescript cap lowered. He craved anonymity, not recognition. That he was simply another face in the crowd, another set of eyes. Eager for the violent ballet about to unfold inside the steel fencing, he sank into the cushioned seat, the leather cool against his skin. The air hung thick with the tang of exertion, stale hops, and a faint, iron-tinged scent he knew intimately, he dismissed the hovering waitress with a subtle wave, her offer of overpriced drinks unwelcome. Clarity was paramount. The opening bout was already in progress. Two lightweights engaged in a cautious dance. Statham watched intently, dissecting each feint. And Perry, the blonde fighter, a whirlwind of unfocused fury and telegraphed punches, favored brawn over brain. His opponent, a lean Latino with the fluid grace of a matador, darted in and out, stinging the larger man with sharp, economic jabs. He admired the Latino's efficiency. The calculated conservation of energy as he waited for an opening to IT was more than just raw power. It was strategy, a cold reading of vulnerabilities, that a brutal game of inches played with fists and shins. The crowd roared as the blonde's fist found its mark, sending the Latino staggering to a quick recovery, a sidestep, and a precise kick to the ribs. Statham's almost imperceptible nod acknowledged the fighter's resilience. Endurance was the linchpin. He had witnessed this spectacle countless times. Lived it, even known the sting of a glove, the throb of bone on bone. Yet, each contest offered a new perspective, a variation, a refinement. The game was in perpetual flux, a relentless pursuit of mastery. A sudden flash of light snagged his attention, and he winced, dipping his head further. Someone had spotted him. Unavoidable, he supposed, he hoped. For the courtesy of silence. The fight concluded in the second round, the Latino locking in a punishing armbar that forced a swift tap-out. The crowd erupted, a discordant symphony of cheers and boos. Statham simply inclined his head, a silent acknowledgement of the victor's prowess. He wasn't here to judge, to applaud, or to condemn. Observation was his sole purpose. He sensed someone encroaching on his space. He looked up to see a man looming over him, a sneer contorting his features. "Enjoying the carnage, Mr. Statham?" The voice was syrupy, almost cloying. Statham recognized him instantly. Rico, a middling heavyweight known more for his pre-fight antics than his actual ability, he'd never warranted a second glance. "It's a fight," Statham replied, his tone even, devoid of inflection. "What's not to find interesting?" Rico gave a dry, unpleasant chuckle. "I hear you used to be something special, back in the day." He leaned in closer, the cloying scent of cheap cologne hitting Statham. "But those days are gone, right? Now you're just a has-been, watching the young blood spill theirs." Statham met his gaze, his expression giving nothing away. He refused to be drawn in. Not here, not now. He'd learned long ago that silence was the sharpest riposte to arrogance. Let them underestimate you. Let them savor their perceived advantage. The reckoning would be all the sweeter. "Fighting tonight, Rico?" Statham inquired, his voice measured, revealing nothing. "Maybe," Rico said, a predatory gleam in his eye. "Maybe I'll put on a show you won't soon forget." Statham offered another curt nod, turning his attention back to the octagon. The next fight was imminent, and he refused to allow Rico's juvenile needling to distract him. He was here to study, to absorb, to prepare, and if Rico intended to stage a spectacle, he would gladly be the audience. He had a feeling the performance wouldn't unfold as Rico envisioned. The challenge. The bell's resonance still hummed in the rafters, a lingering vibration in the wake of his triumph. When Rico launched into his celebratory display, he pranced on the pads of his feet, showcasing sculpted sinews slicked with sweat under the arena's glare. He drank in the crowd's frenzy, each shouted dose of the recognition he craved. Yet a subtle discordance nagged at him. The ovation felt incomplete, lacking a specific sting, a targeted burn. His gaze swept over the VIP boxes until he spotted him. Jason Statham. Immobile, arms folded, his expression a carefully guarded enigma behind that signature scruff. Rico's grin widened, morphing into something predatory. This was the catalyst, the missing spark he needed. He snatched the microphone from Maria, the matador Rodriguez, nearly wresting it from her grasp. She shot him a cutting glance, disapproval etched on her face. But he was already speaking, his voice booming, amplified into the expectant air. "Ladies and gentlemen, witness the might of Razor Rico, undefeated in this division." He paused, letting the cheers break against him like a wave. Then, he aimed a pointed finger at Statham. We get a lot of celebrity rubberneckers at these events, actors playing tough guys, trying to leech some authenticity from the real grit, the true sacrifice, the genuine suffering on display here. A frisson of discomfort rippled through the audience. The cheers dwindled, replaced by a hushed murmur. Maria advanced, hand outstretched, attempting to reclaim her property. Rico was oblivious, lost in the unfolding drama. Mr. Statham, he pressed on, contempt lacing his tone. I've seen your flicks that you're adequate at make-believe, adept at choreographed mayhem. But this is unscripted. This is a cage, not a set. Think you could survive a single round with me? He lowered the microphone, theatrically cupping his ear. What's that, Jason? Is it the sound of abject terror I hear? He began to prowl the perimeter of the cage, his eyes riveted to Statham. I bet you think it all looks so straightforward, that you could saunter in here and flatten me with one cinematic punch. What do you understand about dedication? About years of brutal training, fractured bones, the indomitable will require to stand here, victorious before you all. The arena fell into a near-palpable hush. Every gaze was fixed on Statham, awaiting his response. Maria, now at ringside, glared at Rico with unveiled fury, but he was too consumed by his own performance to notice. Statham remained unmoved, his expression inscrutable as ever. Still, Rico imagined he detected a flicker in his eyes. Amusement? Irritation? It was irrelevant. He had hooked him. He had taken the bait. Come on, action hero, Rico goaded, his voice escalating in pitch. Show the world what you're made of. I'm calling you out. Right now, right here. Let's see if those Hollywood muscles are more than just smoke and mirrors. The world is your stage. The canvas awaits. He flung his arms wide, gesturing toward the open cage door. The crowd transformed into a sea of expectant faces, their previous discomfort now supplanted by a feverish anticipation. This was a spectacle far more thrilling than any stage combat they had paid for. This was raw, unfiltered drama unfolding live. Rico held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs that a volatile blend of dread and elation churned within him. What if Statham accepted? No, he wouldn't. He couldn't possibly. He was an actor, not a warrior. This was merely a game, not a means to seize the attention he craved. He shot a glance at Maria. Her face was a mask of tightly leashed rage. He knew he was tempting fate. He knew he was overstepping, yet he remained powerless to halt himself. He needed this moment. He needed the affirmation that he needed to establish beyond any doubt that he was the genuine article, not just some pretty face with a lucky strike. Words like daggers. Rico's voice, amplified by the arena's sound system, dripped with venom. Look at you, Statham, Mr. Action Hero. Bet you think you're tough, huh? All those explosions and fake punches, it's cute. He punctuated the last word with a mocking kiss blown towards the VIP box. The crowd roared, a mix of cheers and jeers. Statham remained motionless, a granite statue carved with sharp angles. His eyes, dark pools reflecting the arena lights, never left Rico. Not a flinch, not a twitch, just that unnerving, unwavering stare. Rico, emboldened by the crowd's reaction, pressed on. I bet you can't even throw a proper punch. Probably just a bunch of carefully choreographed wrist flicks that, am I right? Tell me, Statham, what's it like knowing that you're a fraud? A charlatan playing a tough guy? Maria, the Matador Rodriguez, perched in her commentary booth, adjusted her headset. Rico's letting his insecurity show, she murmured, more to herself than to her co-commentator. He needs this attention, that he needs to tear someone down to feel bigger. It's a dangerous game he's playing. The words began to sting. Not physically, but something inside Statham, something buried deep under years of discipline and control, stirred. He felt a flicker of something cold and dangerous. Rico continued his tirade, his voice rising in pitch. I heard you even had stunt doubles for some of those fight scenes. Pathetic. I bet you couldn't last 5 minutes in the octagon with me. 0.5 minutes. More like 5 seconds that I'd knock you in next Tuesday. He puffed out his chest, preening for the cameras. Maria shook her head. He's crossing a line. This isn't just showmanship anymore. This is personal. And Statham, well, I've seen that look before. It's the calm before the storm. Rico, oblivious to the gathering storm, dug deeper. You know, my grandma hits harder than you. And she's dead. Maybe you should stick to acting, Statham. Leave the real fighting to the professionals. Or better yet, go back to whatever rock you crawled out from under. He paused, as if waiting for a witty retort. When none came, he sneered. Cat got your tongue, tough guy? A muscle ticked in Statham's jaw. His hands, resting lightly on the railing of the VIP box, tightened. The knuckles turned white. Maria leaned closer to her microphone. He's pushing him, folks. Really pushing him. This is reckless. Rico needs to remember that words have power. They can be sharper than any blade. And Statham, well, he's a man who knows how to wield a blade. She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Rico, fueled by his own arrogance and the roar of the crowd, hadn't noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. He was too busy basking in the attention. I bet your fans are starting to realize they've been duped, he crowed. All those carefully crafted scenes. It's all a lie. You're a fake. The final words seemed to hang in the air, an insult so pointed, so deliberately cruel, that it shattered the fragile composure Statham had been clinging to his eyes, no longer reflecting the arena lights, now burned with an intensity that sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. The cheers began to die down, replaced by a nervous silence. Maria's voice cut through the tension. He's poked the bear. And this bear is about to wake up. She watched, her eyes narrowed, as Statham finally moved. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible. He simply straightened his shoulders, and the air around him seemed to crackle with suppressed energy. Rico, lost in his own hubris, hadn't noticed. Not yet acceptance. The microphone amplified Rico's grating voice, each word laced with venomous glee. Still hiding up there, Statham, still afraid to come down and face a real fighter? The bravado dripped from him, slick and sickening, that he paced the octagon, a caged animal smelling blood. The crowd, initially titillated, was now growing restless, a low hum of discontent vibrating through the stadium. They wanted a show, and Rico was offering them only taunts. Then something shifted up in the VIP box. A figure moved. Jason Statham, he rose slowly, deliberately, from his plush leather seat. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it radiated an undeniable presence. The hum of the crowd died, replaced by a collective intake of breath. Every eye in the arena was fixed on him. He didn't rush, and he didn't posture. He simply stood, his posture relaxed, almost casual, yet radiating an intensity that made the air crackle. The steely glint in his eyes, visible even from the cheap seats, was a laser focused on Rico. He wasn't smiling. There was no triumphant smirk, no theatrical display, just a quiet, unwavering gaze. Rico, for the briefest of moments, faltered. The swagger seemed to deflate, the bravado momentarily cracking under the weight of Statham's attention. He shifted his weight uncomfortably, his usual boisterous energy momentarily extinguished. Statham reached into his pocket, pulling out what looked like a small, rectangular device, a phone, a remote. He held it to his mouth, and then a voice, amplified and clear, boomed through the stadium. All right, Ramirez. Statham's voice was calm, almost conversational, but it resonated with an authority that silenced the remaining murmurs in the crowd. You want to fight? You got one. The stadium exploded, a cacophony of cheers, whistles, and shouts ripped through the air, shaking the very foundations of the building. The crowd surged forward, a wave of humanity crashing against the barriers separating them from the octagon. Beer flew, chants erupted, and the roar became deafening. Down in the octagon, Rico's eyes widened, that he licked his lips, a nervous tick betraying the insecurity he usually so carefully masked. The cheers were for Statham, not him. He'd wanted attention. But this was different. This was a tidal wave of anticipation he suddenly wasn't sure he could ride. Security personnel, caught completely off guard, scrambled to respond, they'd anticipated heckling, maybe even a thrown bottle. They hadn't anticipated this. A celebrity of Statham's magnitude accepting Rico's ludicrous challenge. Their radios crackled with panicked instructions. Their faces a mixture of disbelief and sheer terror. Lines of guards formed, attempting to maintain order, but they were fighting a losing battle against the sheer force of the crowd's excitement. Statham, meanwhile, remained unfazed. He turned and spoke to someone behind him in the VIP box, his expression unreadable. Then, he turned back to the octagon, his gaze locking onto Rico's. He gave the slightest of nods, that a silent acknowledgement, that a promise. Rico swallowed hard. The lights seemed to intensify, the noise seemed to amplify, and the octagon suddenly felt a lot smaller. The cocky grin he'd worn just moments before was gone, replaced by a flicker of something akin to fear. He'd wanted this, he'd craved this. But now that it was actually happening, a cold dread began to creep into his bones. He was about to get exactly what he'd asked for, and he had a sinking feeling he wasn't going to like it. The makeshift ring. The challenge was laid down, the gauntlet thrown. Now, someone had to pick it up. The ripple of nervous energy spread through the crowd. The music, still thumping, felt suddenly inappropriate, a jarring soundtrack to the brewing confrontation. It was Marco, one of the bar's bulliest bouncers, who stepped up first. He conferred with two others, and together they began clearing a space in the center of the VIP section. Sofas were shoved aside, cocktail tables unceremoniously dumped against the wall. The plush carpet became a makeshift canvas. Ropes were clearly out of the question, but the bouncers used the discarded furniture as a perimeter, creating a chaotic, uneven ring of sorts. It was a far cry from the pristine octagon Rico was used to, but it would have to do. Rico Ramirez, basking in the attention, puffed out his chest. He bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, shadowboxing. His movements, exaggerated for the benefit of the phone cameras, now pointed his way. "Come on, old man," taunted, his voice dripping with condescension. "Don't tell me you need a nap before we get started." He spat on the floor, a gesture that seemed both childish and calculated. In the VIP box, Statham remained impassive. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. But then he did something unexpected. He rose slowly from his seat. The collective gasp went through the crowd. All eyes were on him. He unbuttoned his tailored jacket, handing it to a woman nearby with a brief nod. Underneath, he wore a simple black t-shirt that clung to his lean frame and bulging muscles. No veins popping out like Rico's, just a quiet, understated strength. Then he began to move. Not with the flamboyant swagger of Rico, but with a focused, almost unsettling grace. That he started with a series of stretches, rotating his shoulders, loosening his neck. Each movement was precise, economical, that he wasn't showboating. He was preparing. He dropped into a fighting stance, his feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent. He began a shadow box. But this was different from Rico's posturing. There was a fluidity, a controlled power in his movements. He snapped out jabs, hooks, and uppercuts, each one landing with an imaginary thud. His fists moved like lightning, a blur of controlled aggression. Then he started to kick. High, snapping kicks that reached head height with effortless ease. He moved around the perimeter of the makeshift ring, his bare feet silent on the carpet. He wasn't just warming up. He was calibrating, testing the space, feeling the energy of the room. That a hush fell over the crowd. The playful taunts and nervous chatter died down. Even the music seemed to fade into the background. They were witnessing something unexpected, something that transcended the initial bravado. This wasn't just some washed-up action star trying to relive his glory days. This was something else entirely. Rico, who had been preening and posing, suddenly stilled. His smile faltered. He stopped bouncing and lowered his hands. The carefully constructed image of invincibility began to crack. That he watched Statham's fluid movements, the controlled power in his strikes, and a flicker of something akin to doubt crossed his face. That it was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a tiny seed of uncertainty planted in the fertile ground of his ego. To try to cover it. Of course, he forced a laugh, a little too loud, a little too strained. "Okay, Grandpa. Feeling limber?" he called out, but the words lacked their earlier bite. Statham didn't respond. He continued his warm-up, his focus absolute. He was a predator sizing up his prey, and for the first time that night, Rico felt like the one being hunted. The confidence that had propelled him through the evening, the swagger that had defined his career, seemed to shrink under the intensity of Statham's gaze. The makeshift ring suddenly felt a whole lot smaller. Showtime. Showtime. The announcer's voice boomed, and the crowd roared. Rico, basking in the noise, bounced on the balls of his feet. He caught Statham's eye in the VIP box that a sneer twisted his lips. Time to wipe that smug look off the movie star's face. The bell rang, and Rico exploded forward, a lightning-fast jab, followed by a spinning back kick aimed at Statham's head. The move, usually a crowd-pleaser, was intended to humiliate. He wanted to see fear flicker across the actor's face. But Statham didn't flinch. Instead, with a speed that defied his age, he ducked under the jab, the kick whistling harmlessly over his head. Rico stumbled, momentarily unbalanced. Statham used the opening to close the distance, not with aggression, but with calculated control. He trapped Rico's kicking leg, using it to pivot him off balance. Rico, stunned, found himself backing toward the cage. He threw a wild left hook, desperation tightening his gut. Again, Statham evaded, this time with a subtle shift of his weight, the punch missing. By a hair's breadth, he responded with a crisp, short jab to Rico's solar plexus. The air rushed from Rico's lungs. "Show off!" Maria, the matador Rodriguez, yelled from ringside. Her voice cutting through the din. She saw the pattern emerging that Rico's arrogance had blinded him. He was playing into Statham's game. Rico, winded and rattled, tried to regain the offensive. He feinted a takedown, then launched a high kick. Statham blocked, the impact echoing through the arena. He used the block to transition into a clinch, wrapping his arms around Rico's torso, up close. Rico felt the actor's strength, that it wasn't the brute power of a bodybuilder, but a dense, coiled force. That Statham's grip was like iron. He tried to break free, but Statham held firm, his breathing even, almost calm. "Having fun yet, pretty boy?" Rico spat, trying to mask the rising panic. Statham didn't reply. He simply tightened his grip, the pressure increasing until Rico grunted. He felt trapped, his movements restricted. This wasn't supposed to be happening. He was supposed to be dominating, humiliating. Statham released the clinch abruptly, pushing Rico back. That he didn't follow up with an attack. Instead, he circled, his eyes fixed on Rico, assessing. Rico, confused, lashed out again, a sloppy combination of punches that were easily dodged. He was losing control. His carefully constructed image of invincibility was crumbling. The crowd, sensing the shift in momentum, began to murmur. Maria shook her head. Rico was burning himself out. His wild attacks were leaving him vulnerable. Statham was conserving energy, waiting for the opportune moment. It was a clinic in controlled aggression versus youthful recklessness. This wasn't a brawl. It was a dissection. Rico charged, a desperate roar escaping his lips. That he had to end this, had to prove himself. That he launched himself into a flying knee, a high-risk move meant to end the fight decisively. Statham sidestepped, the knee sailing past him. Rico landed awkwardly. Off balance, Statham seized the opportunity. That he stepped in, delivering a swift, perfectly timed leg sweep. Rico crashed to the mat. Before Rico could scramble to his feet, Statham was on him, pinning him with calculated weight distribution. He wasn't raining down punches. Instead, he maintained control, his eyes locked on Rico's. The cocky smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of fear. The crowd was on its feet, a wave of noise washing over the arena. They weren't cheering for Rico anymore. They were witnessing something unexpected, something masterful. Statham leaned in close, his voice a low rumble that only Rico could hear. "You talk too much," he said, then abruptly released him. He stood up, backing away, giving Rico space to rise. The message was clear. This wasn't about inflicting pain. It was about teaching a lesson. Rico, his face flushed, his ego bruised, pushed himself to his feet. That he knew, with sickening certainty, that the fight had just begun, and he was already losing. The laughter and cheers of the crowd felt like a crushing weight. He glanced at Statham, who simply stood there, calm and collected, waiting for Rico to make his next mistake. Respect earned. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, buffeting Rico as he circled Statham, a shark eyeing a wounded seal he feinted left. Right, a lazy jab that wouldn't have touched Statham's nose even if the man wasn't standing so still. Rico wanted him to flinch, to react, to give him something to work with besides that infuriating calm. "What's wrong, tough guy?" Rico taunted, his voice amplified by the arena's sound system. "Scared to throw a punch? Maybe you should stick to movies." He punctuated his words with another jab, again pulled short, a deliberate act of humiliation. Statham remained unmoved, his eyes locked on Rico's. Maria, watching from her seat near the cage, frowned. Rico was letting his ego dictate his strategy, telegraphing his intentions with every exaggerated movement. He was playing to the crowd, not fighting. Then, with a suddenness that stole the breath from the arena, Statham moved. It wasn't a punch, not a kick, not any of the flashy techniques Rico seemed to expect. That it was a takedown, a textbook double leg, executed with speed and precision that belied Statham's age and perceived lack of experience. The impact of Rico's back hitting the canvas echoed through the arena, silencing the jeers. Statham, on top, transitioned smoothly, his movements fluid and economical. He didn't rain down blows, didn't posture for the cameras. Instead, he secured a tight arm triangle choke, his grip tightening with each passing second. Rico struggled, bucking and twisting, trying to break free. Sweat glistened on his face as he fought against the inevitable. The color drained from his complexion, replaced by a sickly pallor. The referee hovered, his eyes glued to Rico's face, watching for any sign of surrender. The fight drained from Rico. His muscles burned, his lungs screamed for air, and the constricting pressure around his neck intensified. He was trapped, helpless, humiliated. The realization crashed over him, a cold wave of shame washing away his bravado. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was barely audible above the din, but the referee saw it, the frantic, desperate tapping against Statham's arm. He immediately intervened, pulling Statham off Rico. The arena erupted. The cacophony of cheers, whistles, and gasps filled the air. Some were cheering for Statham, for the underdog who had defied expectations. Others were simply stunned, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Statham stood, his breathing steady, his expression unchanged. He looked down at Rico, who lay gasping on the canvas, his face a mask of disbelief. Then he extended a hand. Rico stared at the hand, then up at Statham's face. The animosity that had fueled his pre-fight bravado had evaporated, replaced by a raw, vulnerable emotion that Maria recognized instantly: shame. After a moment of hesitation, Rico took Statham's hand. Statham pulled him to his feet, a gesture of respect that transcended the fight itself. The crowd roared its approval, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The referee raised Statham's arm in victory. Statham said something to Rico, his words lost in the noise. Rico nodded, his eyes downcast. Whatever Statham had said, it seemed to have struck a chord. Maria watched as Statham left the cage, the cheers of the crowd following him. She turned her attention back to Rico, who was slowly making his way to his corner, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed. "That," she said quietly to her corner man, "is what happens when you mistake arrogance for confidence." Rico forgot that this is a fight, not a performance. He was so busy trying to impress everyone that he forgot to respect his opponent. Statham just gave him a very public lesson in humility. She paused, her gaze fixed on Rico. "And I have a feeling it's a lesson he won't soon forget."